is between 5'9" and 5'10", average build. He has a black mustache. He carried a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack. He had a gun in a holster positioned incorrectly across the front of his waist. He held a bite light in his mouth so both hands would be free. He wore gloves. He wore a ski mask. And on the morning of February 1st, 2026, he walked up to Nancy Guthrie's front door in the Catalina Foothills, tried to disable her doorbell camera, and took an 84-year-old woman from her bed. You already know this. You've seen the footage the FBI recovered from Google's back-end systems. You've watched him tilt his head under the archway. You've seen the gloved hand reach for the camera, the bush pulled over the lens. You know that Nancy's doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47 a.m. You know that her pacemaker app went offline by 2:28. You know that more than 20,000 tips have come in and that none of them have brought her home. But there is something you may not know. Something that a former FBI profiler who helped catch the Unabomber believes could break this case open. He doesn't think this was about Nancy. It has been more than 3 weeks since 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in the Catalina Foothills, just outside Tucson, Arizona. In that time, the investigation has consumed federal and local resources on a scale rarely seen in a domestic kidnapping case. And as of right now, investigators still do not have a named suspect. On February 10th, 9 days after Nancy vanished, the FBI released doorbell camera footage that authorities had previously said was unrecoverable. The Google Nest camera at Nancy's front door did not have an active subscription, meaning the footage should have been overwritten. But FBI technicians working with Google extracted the images from residual data buried in back-end systems. A forensic recovery that took over a week to accomplish. The footage shows a masked individual approaching Nancy's front door in the early morning hours, armed, gloved, carrying an Ozark Trail backpack, a black mustache, partially visible beneath the ski mask. The individual attempts to disable the camera, first by tapping at it, then by pulling foliage from a nearby plant over the lens. 2 days later, investigators released a refined physical description, 5'9" to 5'10", average build. Within hours, a man was detained during a traffic stop 60 miles south of Tucson. His home was searched. He was questioned and released without charges. 3 days later, a SWAT operation descended on a home 2 miles from Nancy's residence. Another man detained. Another search warrant executed. Another release without charges. Neither individual has been connected to the crime. Then there is the DNA. And this is where the investigation hits a wall that the public may not fully understand. Blood was found inside Nancy's home. A law enforcement source familiar with the investigation has confirmed that the blood droplets inside the house match the pattern outside the front door. Vertical drops, falling straight down at 90 degrees. No smears, no signs of struggle, no footprints through the blood. The same controlled dripping pattern on both sides of the threshold. Biological evidence collected from inside the house has been sent to NanoLabs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida. The sheriff has publicly confirmed that the lab is working with a mixed DNA sample, and that separating it has become a significant challenge. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what mixed DNA actually means in a criminal investigation. CeCe Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon NanoLabs, has explained the problem directly. If the mixture were Nancy's DNA combined with an unknown male, the lab could perform what's called deconvolution, extracting her known profile from the sample to isolate the unknown contributor. That would be relatively straightforward. The fact that the lab is struggling suggests the mixture is more complex, possibly 2 or more unknown contributors, possibly 3. And without a reference sample for any of them, separating the profiles becomes exponentially more difficult. If the unknown male is the minor contributor and say 10% of the mixture, it may be impossible to isolate a usable profile. If there are 3 or 4 contributors, the chances drop further. More has been clear. This does not mean the DNA evidence is useless, but it does mean the forensic path that everyone expected to produce a name quickly may not deliver one at all. The glove recovered 2 miles from Nancy's home was submitted to CoDIS. No match. The DNA from inside the house remains under analysis. The ransom communications that surfaced through TMZ and local media have produced nothing actionable. No proof of life, no verified contact between the family and the actual abductor. One California man was arrested for filing a fraudulent ransom demand entirely unrelated to the crime. This is the gap. The footage exists, the DNA exists, the tips exist. But the forensic evidence is stalled in a Florida lab, and 21 days of investigation have not produced a name. That is why a former FBI profiler has taken a different approach entirely. Not forensics, not surveillance, behavioral science. A profile of who this person is. Not what they look like, but how they act. Jim Fitzgerald's first case as an FBI profiler was the Unabomber. He was deployed to the San Francisco field office on what was supposed to be a 30-day assignment. He ended up staying for the duration. His task was to help rewrite the behavioral profile of Ted Kaczynski after the manifesto was published, a document that became central to the identification and arrest. Over the 12 years that followed, Fitzgerald worked cases that defined American criminal investigation. The anthrax letters mailed to newsrooms and senators in the weeks after September 11th. The D.C. sniper attacks. He established the FBI's Forensic and Linguistic Analysis Program. He spent more than a decade in the Behavioral Analysis Unit, interviewing incarcerated serial offenders, building profiles from crime scene behavior, and putting behavioral frameworks in front of the public to help generate leads. When the Nancy Guthrie case passed the 3-week mark without an arrest, Fitzgerald and his cold red co-host, former analyst Ray Carr, built a behavioral profile. Not because anyone asked them to, because in Fitzgerald's assessment, nobody else was putting one out. The profile doesn't describe what the abductor looks like. The footage already does that. What the profile describes is how the abductor behaves, the patterns that emerge before a crime of this nature, the psychological shifts that follow it, and the specific observable behaviors that the people closest to the individual would be able to recognize if they knew what to look for. Fitzgerald and Carr divided the profile into 2 motivational categories. The first, revenge. The second, obsession. And they believe the evidence leans heavily toward one of them. Behavioral profiling operates on a principle that Fitzgerald has built his career around. People cannot fully conceal the preparation for a serious crime. The one planning bleeds into daily life. It changes sleep patterns, purchasing habits, internet behavior, social interactions, emotional stability. It creates disruptions that the people around the offender can detect if they understand that those disruptions mean something. Fitzgerald breaks the observable behavior into 3 phases. Pre-offense, the days and weeks leading up to the abduction. Post-offense, phase 1, the period between the crime and the release of the doorbell footage on February 10th. And post-offense, phase 2, everything after the footage went public, when the individual realized that millions of people were now studying their silhouette, their gait, their backpack, their mustache, their improperly holstered weapon. In the days and weeks before the abduction, Fitzgerald's profile suggests a consistent behavioral pattern. Someone close to this individual, a roommate, a family member, a co-worker, a neighbor, would have noticed that something was off. The individual would have appeared unusually distracted, mentally absent, present in the room, but clearly somewhere else. The kind of shift that someone who knows them well might describe as disconnected, but without being able to name exactly why. There would have been a period of unexplained activity, projects that didn't align with any obvious purpose, late nights unaccounted for, errands that didn't make sense. If pressed for an explanation, the responses would have been vague or dismissive, designed to end the conversation, not answer the question. Internet usage would have increased, and the nature of the searches would have been unusual. Depending on the motive, this could include research into the Guthrie family, into the Catalina Foothills neighborhood, into the layout of residential streets near Skyline Drive and Campbell Avenue. There is already public reporting that internet searches for Nancy Guthrie's address and Savannah Guthrie's salary may have spiked before the abduction, though Google has cautioned that search trend data is not evidence of individual activity. There would have been purchases, items that individually might seem harmless, but together form a clear pattern: a ski mask, gloves, tape, restraints, a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, the exact model identified in the FBI footage, a compact bite light, the kind of hands-free flashlight held in the mouth that signals tactical preparation, dark clothing. These purchases would have been out of character for whoever made them, and critically, this individual would have demonstrated an obsessive interest in one or more high-profile women. Television personalities, public figures, celebrities, the kind of fixation that those close to the person might have noticed, but written off as a harmless fascination. In this case, Fitzgerald believes that interest almost certainly includes Savannah Guthrie. For the first 9 days after the abduction, the individual may have believed they were in the clear. The doorbell camera had been disconnected. There was no subscription to save the footage. No witnesses came forward. The investigation was consuming enormous resources, but producing no public leads. During this window, the behavioral profile predicts concealment behaviors. The individual's daily schedule changes in ways that people around them can observe. They're either locked in one location for unusual stretches or conspicuously absent from the places they'd normally be. Work is missed. Family events are skipped. If they leave town, the reasons are unclear. If they stay, the hours they keep stop making sense. Signs of psychological strain become visible. Sleep disruption, a shorter temper, increased drinking or substance use, a general volatility that wasn't there before the 1st of February. The people around them can feel it, even if they can't explain it. 2. Behaviors are particularly telling in this phase. The first is unsolicited alibis. The individual begins volunteering explanations for where they've been and what they've been doing without anyone asking. They over-explain. They offer details that nobody requested. The second is obsessive cleaning and disposal. Vehicles scrubbed inside and out. Clothing discarded. Living spaces deep cleaned. Digital devices wiped, reset, or physically destroyed. A garage emptied out. A storage space reorganized. Activity that, in hindsight, looks unmistakably like someone eliminating evidence. The release of the Nest camera footage is a seismic event for the person responsible. Their silhouette, their build, their clothing, their backpack brand, their improperly positioned holster, their visible mustache beneath the ski mask, their gait, their specific movements. All of it is now being studied by millions of people worldwide. FBI Director Kash Patel posted the images directly. The President of the United States reviewed the footage personally. In this phase, the behavioral shift accelerates dramatically. The individual becomes frenetic, nervous in ways that are increasingly difficult to conceal, irritable without clear provocation, physically restless, unable to sit still, pacing, agitated. They may change their appearance. A haircut, growing or shaving the mustache that is now the single most discussed facial feature in the case. Any alteration that might create distance between who they are and what the public has now seen on 100 million screens. Media consumption becomes obsessive. Every news broadcast, every YouTube video, every podcast episode, every social media thread. This person is tracking the case with an intensity that far exceeds normal public interest. They are searching for their own description. They are checking whether investigators are getting closer, and they are almost certainly consuming content exactly like this. Fitzgerald also warns that individuals in this psychological state frequently attempt to influence the investigation. They call tip lines with false information designed to misdirect. They post misleading theories on social media under anonymous accounts. They bring up the case in conversations with people around them, not to share genuine concern, but to test reactions, to see how much others know, to gauge whether anyone suspects them. This individual is not invisible. They have a life. They have people around them. And someone in that orbit has noticed the changes. Erotomania is a recognized psychological condition in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It is a delusional disorder in which an individual becomes convinced that another person, typically someone famous, someone visible, someone in a position of public power, is in love with them. This is not a crush. It is not obsessive fandom. It is a fully constructed psychological architecture in which the delusion feels as real and as certain as any lived experience. Neutral signals are interpreted as personal messages. A smile during a broadcast becomes an expression of affection. A word choice becomes a coded signal. A specific outfit becomes a declaration meant only for them. And here's the detail that connects this condition to the Guthrie case in a way no other theory does. Actors during a performance look at other actors. They engage with their scene partners. The audience watches, but the eye contact is indirect. Television news anchors are fundamentally different. They look directly into the camera, into the lens, into what feels from the other side of the screen, like direct eye contact with the viewer. For someone with erotomania, that perceived connection isn't a broadcasting technique. It's a relationship. Every morning, 5 days a week. The person they believe loves them is looking at them and speaking to them. Savannah Guthrie has been a co-anchor of NBC's Today Show for more than a decade. She has appeared in American living rooms 5 mornings a week, looking directly into the camera for years. Fitzgerald notes that in his time as an FBI agent in New York, the head of NBC Security contacted him roughly 4 times a year about a female journalist or television personality being harassed by an obsessive viewer. It was routine. It was constant. And it is the specific type of threat that Fitzgerald believes investigators should be examining most closely in this case. This is not speculation without precedent. In 1981, John Hinckley Jr. attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. His motive was not political. He had developed an obsessive fixation on the actress Jodie Foster and became convinced that only an act of extraordinary magnitude would prove he was worthy of her attention. He shot the President of the United States to impress a woman who did not know he existed. In 1989, a young actress named Rebecca Schaefer answered her front door in Los Angeles. On the other side was a man named Robert John Bardo, who had been tracking her movements for years. He had written letters. He had traveled across the country. He arrived that day with flowers. When Schaefer closed the door, he killed her. She was 21. In 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was taken from her bedroom in Salt Lake City. Her captor held her for 9 months. The crime was driven by possessive obsession, the desire to keep another person. The goal was not murder, it was ownership. In every case, the target was unreachable through normal means. The obsession demanded an outlet, and the violence followed a path that rational analysis would never predict, but that the delusional mind understood completely. The hypothesis is specific. The individual who abducted Nancy Guthrie may be suffering from erotomania or an obsessive fixation centered on Savannah Guthrie. Unable to access Savannah directly, she lives in a secured environment, travels with awareness of her public profile, and is insulated by the infrastructure that surrounds a high-profile media figure. The individual turned to the closest available proxy, her 84-year-old mother, alone in a house on a quiet street, with limited mobility and no security beyond a doorbell camera without a subscription. If this theory is correct, the implications for Nancy's survival shift. If the motive is obsession rather than profit, if the driving force is delusional attachment rather than ransom, then the individual may not want Nancy dead. The goal may be access, conversation, a connection to Savannah through the person who raised her. What was she like as a child? Is there any chance she could love me? These are the questions a person in the grip of erotomania asks, and they are the questions that might keep an 84-year-old woman alive. There is something else. After the abduction became public, Savannah released a series of video statements. In the most notable, her tone shifted. She spoke not just to the public, but directly to whoever was holding her mother, with empathy, with a specific kind of calibrated appeal, the kind that behavioral analysts at the FBI guide family members to make when addressing someone whose actions may be driven by obsession. She was not speaking to a faceless criminal. She was speaking to someone who, in their own mind, knew her. Fitzgerald believes the FBI is almost certainly working this angle behind the scenes. That means going through every piece of communication Savannah Guthrie has received in years. Every email, every direct message, every fan letter, every request for a photograph or an autograph that carried even a slightly unusual tone. Somewhere in that archive may be a name. If the individual behind this crime is an obsessive stalker, Fitzgerald describes what investigators would expect to find: a dedicated space, a closet, a trunk, a locked room, a storage unit. Inside, collected materials related to Savannah Guthrie, recorded broadcasts replayed hundreds of times, printed photographs, clips saved and organized, memorabilia. If the individual ever stood outside the Today Show studio and interacted with Savannah through the crowd, even for a few seconds, that moment would be preserved, recorded on a phone, replayed obsessively, elevated to the status of a personal encounter. This is the detail designed to trigger recognition, not in the general public, in the specific person who lives with, works with, or regularly encounters the individual responsible. The roommate who noticed the collection and never asked about it. The family member who saw the locked container and assumed it was personal property. The co-worker who heard conversations about a television anchor that went beyond casual viewing. Someone has seen it. Someone knows what it means. There has been speculation that the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance may soon see a reduction in resources. That leads are drying up. That the case is approaching a threshold beyond which active investigations begin to wind down. Fitzgerald rejects this entirely. He draws a direct parallel to the Unabomber task force. After Kaczynski returned to active bombing in the mid-1990s, killing 2 people, a dedicated task force was assembled. Agents rotated in and out for years. Fitzgerald was assigned for 30 days. He stayed until the arrest. That is how investigations of this magnitude function. Not as fixed teams that shrink when leads slow, but as living operations that expand and contract with the flow of evidence. But the question that most of the public is asking is more direct. Why hasn't the DNA solved this yet? The answer runs deeper than a lab delay. The sheriff confirmed to NBC that the Florida lab is struggling with the mixed DNA sample. What, he did not explain, and what the public deserves to understand, is the science behind that struggle. CeCe Moore, who runs the genetic genealogy program at Parabon NanoLabs and has helped solve hundreds of cases using forensic DNA, laid out the problem in detail. The lab needs to create 2 types of genetic profiles from the evidence. The first is an STR profile, a short tandem repeat, which is the standard genetic fingerprint uploaded to CODIS, the FBI's national database. If the person who left the DNA has ever been arrested or convicted of a qualifying crime, their STR profile is in CODIS, and a match is immediate. The second is a SNP profile, a single nucleotide polymorphism, which is what's used for investigative genetic genealogy. This is the method that identified the Golden State Killer. It works by comparing roughly 700,000 genetic markers across the genome to find distant relatives, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, even 5th cousins, who have uploaded their DNA to public databases. From those matches, genetic genealogists build family trees backward until they converge on a single individual. NanoLabs International in Florida can do both processes in parallel. Moore has confirmed this is a strong choice. The lab can extract the DNA, build the STR profile, and build the SNP profile simultaneously. But all of it depends on successfully separating the mixture first. And that is where the case is stuck. If the mixture is two people, and one of them is a major contributor, deconvolution is achievable. If there are 3 or 4 contributors and none of them are dominant, the math becomes extraordinarily difficult. More has been direct. Even the best labs in the country may not be able to isolate a usable profile from a complex mixture where the target is a minor contributor. There is a secondary forensic path. The glove found 2 miles from the home was already run through CODIS with no hit. But if a clean SNP profile can be extracted from the glove, genetic genealogy could still identify its owner, even without a CODIS match. Moore notes that this may already be in progress. But even if the forensic path delivers a name tomorrow, it will not answer the question that matters most. Where is Nancy Guthrie right now? DNA identifies a person. Behavioral science identifies a pattern. And right now, the behavioral path may be the faster one. The investigation is operating on concentric circles. Every person in Nancy's immediate life receives a circle. Every person in those people's lives receives another. Criminal records pulled, psychological histories examined, alibis verified, phone records subpoenaed, travel patterns analyzed. The same process then expands outward, to Savannah, to Nancy's other children, Annie and Cameron, to her late husband, Charles, who died in 1988. Did he have associates who held grudges? Did anyone in his professional network carry unresolved resentment toward the family? The circles keep expanding. Fitzgerald points to the Brown University shooting as a reference. The profile he and Carr assembled suggested a grievance going back months or years. The actual grudge turned out to span a quarter century. This is painstaking work. It does not produce a dramatic arrest within 72 hours. It builds a case so thorough that when the arrest comes, the evidence is overwhelming. A sudden change in daily routine with no clear explanation. Unexplained absences, missed obligations, irregular hours, purchases of unusual materials, particularly anything matching the equipment seen in the FBI footage. Dark clothing, masks, gloves, backpacks, tactical flashlights, restraints. Obsessive media consumption focused on the Nancy Guthrie case that goes far beyond casual interest. Emotional volatility, increased irritability, anxiety, sleeplessness, substance use. Unsolicited explanations for their whereabouts during the last week of January and the first days of February. Sudden changes in appearance, and particularly facial hair. Obsessive cleaning of a vehicle or living space. Disposal of clothing, bags, or electronic devices. And any observable fixation on Savannah Guthrie or any female television personality that you would describe as more than normal. No single one of these indicators is evidence of a crime, but the behavioral profile is a composite, and when the composite matches someone you know, when 3, 4, 5 of these traits describe the same person, that is when a phone call becomes important. Fitzgerald's message to anyone weighing whether their suspicion is worth reporting is unambiguous. Call it in. The FBI processed 2,500 named suspects during the Unabomber investigation before arriving at Ted Kaczynski. Most of those tips were well-intentioned and wrong. Every one that eliminated a suspect brought the investigation closer to the one it couldn't eliminate. The system is built for this. Use it. This case will ultimately be defined by whether Nancy Guthrie comes home. Everything else, the footage, the profiles, the press conferences, the speculation, is secondary to the answer to a single question. Is she alive? Nancy Guthrie was born in Fort Wright, Kentucky, in 1942. She moved to Tucson with her family in the early 1970s and never left. She raised 3 children in the same house where she was taken. Her husband Charles died nearly 4 decades ago, and she stayed. She stayed because that home was her life. Her neighbors describe a woman who was sharp, independent, and present. She walked the neighborhood. She attended church every Sunday. She had a pacemaker and limited mobility, but no cognitive decline. The people who knew her are only now beginning to speak publicly, held back by grief and by a desire not to interfere with the investigation. What they describe is a woman who didn't have enemies, a woman who didn't have conflict, a woman whose only distinguishing risk factor, in the language of behavioral analysis, is that her daughter is famous. She has been missing for 22 days. She requires daily medication. She has a pacemaker. She could not walk 50 yards on her own. Someone took her, someone is keeping her, and someone watching this knows who that person is. Call it in